Okay, for my last little explainer video that I plan on doing on yolk, I wanted to talk about kind of the namesake of the collection, um, yolk and the concept of eggs and shells and things like that. There's two poems in the collection that really play with these symbolisms of eggs and myself being an egg, and those are Dawning and The Shell. Again, this is kind of like a partner poem in a lot of ways. Like I see Dawning as the antecedent to The Shell, and so I just wanted to spend some time explaining some of the symbolisms in these poems so that hopefully you can start to really digest them in a deeper way on your own. Um, so yeah, yolk. Let's talk about the first one. Okay, so to start with Dawning, this is a very convoluted poem, and that's intentional because I am speaking from this dream state. You know, I'm trying to describe the feeling of waking from a dream or being in sort of like a lucid dream where the rules of physics don't apply. You know, you can feel you can feel the earth in your dream, but the wind blows through you. You know, you can fly, and it doesn't feel like flying. It seems like walking. You know, like there those types of confusing in between states is kind of the place that I'm speaking from, which is why I am so symbolic and kind of, really pulling on analogies throughout the poem because I feel like dream states really allow you to play with reality in that way, and that's what makes me so drawn to dreams throughout the collection. I have a few other poems that speak in dream states. But anyway, this one I'm kind of describing, setting the ground work, or I'm setting the, I'm creating the world that I will continue to speak from throughout The Shell, the poem that kind of follows this one, by describing this world where, um, you know, I am as much operating inside of it as I am it itself. So, like, describing yourself as an egg, knowing the world as an egg, and yourself as the yolk within the egg. Um, it's kind of trying to explain the world. It's kind of trying to get at the notion that the world is only ever your world, and life is only ever your life because you will only ever experience things through your own perception and your own perspective. And so there's this intrinsic tie between the world as it exists and your perspective. And I kind of start to unpack that when I get to the stanza of I cupped it in my palm, but it was already warm. I rubbed my thumb across the surface, but it was already smooth. I shook it by my ear, and gravity loosened its insides. The world swirled. So I'm talking about discovering this moon, which landed at my feet as the night was turning into day. So like how the moon, you know, comes down to earth, and then at the same time the sun goes up into the sky. That's the process of dawn turning into day, or like night turning to dawn to day. And so like through that rotation, I'm talking about like the moon, instead of disappearing into the ground, it lands at my feet. And that's like a prophecy where it's like, okay, the world is yours, the moon is yours. What are you going to do with it? And so I start to investigate that question. I'm like shaking it by my ear, I'm rubbing it in my hand. And in that process of being curious about the world and being curious about my place in it, I realize that we are all one, that it's all one, that there is no question. It's like in pondering the question, I answer it, you know? because suddenly I'm taking an active stance in my own life as opposed to just watching the days change, if that makes sense. So like so I shook it by my ear, gravity loosens its insides, the world swirled, sky, dew, and I sloshed together against bounds I hadn't realized. I felt myself crack open. A fluorescence oozed and shook for me, blades punctured, and I bled yellow. I blinked and it was dark. So like that's all to describe this like one big kind of like swirling realization of like, oh shit, like okay, when I start to shake these questions, like the world shakes around me, and suddenly there are boundaries that I hadn't felt before, and like, are those boundaries things that I need to break through, or are those things that are supposed to comfort me and that I'm supposed to stick inside of? So those are the questions that I start to grapple with after I've had that first like blink of realization of like, oh, the world is mine. It's like, okay, well, what do I do with that? Like, do I stay confined inside of these boundaries or do I break out of them? Like, is there always this like violence associated with change? You know, like, do blades not always bend? Is the yoke to be broken? Um, that's to question like, yeah, does change always involve violence? Is there always mourning involved with change? Like, does every single day have to mourn the passing of the last one, or can we just be bright and excited? Can the sun just shine every day? Like, do we have to have this process of like violent, all-consuming change in order to get to the bright light of the day? So I'm starting to question these things, and as I'm questioning them, the world is shaking and changing around me, and everything around me is shifting as I am having these realizations, and all of that is to describe the process of something dawning on you. You know, if you know, I'm describing being pushed high into the sky as answers blew right through me. So, you know, I'm doing is pondering and questioning, and it's drawing me higher and higher, and I'm looking down, and I'm looking for that moon and that once fell at my feet, and where is that world that is supposed to be mine? And then I realized that, you know, all I see is the shell of what once was, and that change had occurred, and that I am the sun now. You know, I am the yolk that has escaped from the shell, and now dawn has come, and it's now day, and there's light, and I am the light. I am the sun. I am the yolk that was inside of this shell, that was the moon, that was the earth, that was everything, you know, and every day is to go through that process of being reborn and realizing that the world is yours to shape and change and be an active participant of, as opposed to just mourning the loss of what was, or taking a passive, you know, surveyor stance on the constant nature of change. It's being an active part of it, and in doing that, the world becomes yours, and you become, you know, the light and the darkness of the day, and it, you know, it's yeah, it's all to say, to draw these connections between change and how change happens, and whether change can be a good thing or a bad thing, and how you decide to change, and describing all of that through the routineness of it, of change, being, you know, the sun and the moon, and how they always orbit, and how we are intrinsically a part of that rhythm. So yeah, and then I've always been drawn to like eggs and yolks, and I think there's just so much symbolism in describing ourselves as embryos, that are being fertilized and nurtured, until there's some point where you need to break out of that and be grown and whole and you know, exposed. And so I'm kind of laying the groundwork for all of that symbolism in this poem, before going on to make it really, really literal in the shell, where I'm you know, talking more about the shell as something that's restrictive, or something that I can hide behind. Less, there's no like sun moon analogy in this. It's all just about talking about like a shell, as like an artifice, that can be a very plain exterior, that can hide a lot of vulnerability and depth inside. So in this one, it's talking more about, um, the shell that we present to other people and how we can get comfortable inside of that shell and too comfortable to really feel seen as like the truly vulnerable people that we are on the inside. So I'm still talking about, this desire to break through and this desire to be understood in all of my complicated, murky, vulnerable insides, but really grappling with what it would take to break through and be seen in that way and compromise my very placid exterior to really achieve that depth of being known. And obviously, I have a visual poem where you really get to see all of the vulnerability in its full form. It was really important to me with this poem to kind of offer that visual, to really make the symbolism very clear, and also just to give me the opportunity to play in a different medium. This one felt the most apt for that. So if you haven't already, definitely go take a look at that visual poem on my website. You can get a bit more of a sense of how I draw some of the symbolisms in this poem. But yeah, that's the shell, that's dawning, and I hope if you haven't already, this has inspired you to check out my first poetry publication titled Yolk. You can pick it up at Bottle Cap Press. You can get the digital download or the print version that can be mailed to you directly. But I really appreciate all your support and all your interest in this publication. I'm really excited to continue writing and to continue publishing, hopefully. So let me know what you've thought about this collection. If you have any other poems that you want me to talk about, I would love nothing more than to keep rambling about it all, because there is so much meaning and thought inside of each one of these poems, and I am really proud of them. So thank you so much, and chat later.